Before we just jump right into testing, I want to go over the tools that you will need for this course. Now, because we are dealing with ASP.NET applications, you will need some version of Visual Studio that allows you to create and open those types of projects. So if you have Visual Studio Professional or above, then great, you are set. But if not, don't worry, because Microsoft has you covered. If you don't have a paid-for version of Visual Studio, you will want to go to visualstudio.com and then click on the downloads link. There are two types of downloads. There are the trials, which are the full versions of Visual Studio. Ultimate is the ultimate version of Visual Studio. It has all of the bells and whistles, but it's also very, very expensive. So if you are interested in purchasing Visual Studio and you have a lot of money to spend, then go for the Ultimate because, well, why not? But if you want something a little bit more reasonably priced, the Professional version is okay. It doesn't have all of the bells and whistles of Ultimate, but it also has everything that you need. And for this course, I'm going to be using Visual Studio Professional, and I will tell you why. But if you don't want to use the trials, then you need to download and install Visual Studio Express for Web. Now, the current version is 2013, and I don't know when Microsoft is going to release the next version of Visual Studio. But the version number really doesn't matter because Visual Studio as a whole doesn't really change from version to version. Of course, they do add features, they update things, the UI changes every once in a while, but the same basic functionality and experience is the same. For example, if you compare Visual Studio Express 2005 with 2013, yes, you're going to notice some differences, but you're also going to feel right at home. So if you want to install Visual Studio Express for Web, you can do so with either the ISO image or you can use the web installer. Now, I recommend that you use the web installer because I have experienced issues with downloading the ISO. Sometimes the image gets corrupted and you've wasted bandwidth just downloading an ISO. But I can't say I've ever had a problem with the installer. So if you want to install it on one machine or even two machines, then the installer is the way to go. If you want to install it on many machines, the ISO might be the better solution for you. Now, once you have Visual Studio installed, go ahead and fire it up and create a new project. And we are going to be given several options. Now, we can choose to create a class library, which is something that we will do in the next lesson. But for this lesson, I want to go to Web. Oh, and by the way, make sure you have Visual C# selected. You, I believe, start with Visual Basic as the default, and why Microsoft does that, I have no idea. So make sure that you have Visual C# selected and you want to go to Web. The only option inside of Web is ASP.NET Web Application. Let's call this Lesson 1. And if you wanted to, you can go ahead and add this to source control, and it would ask you what you wanted to use for source control. Git is an option, so this will create a Git repository for you. I'm not going to do that for this case, and I'm just going to click on OK. Then we are taken to the next window, which asks us what type of ASP.NET application that we want to create. We want an MVC application, and we also want to add unit tests. We can change the project name of our test project if you wanted to, but I'm going to leave it as lesson01.tests. And then whenever you click OK, Visual Studio will create our project for us. Actually, this is going to be two projects. This will be a solution with two projects. And after Visual Studio has created our solution, you see this screen, your ASP.NET applications, and congratulations, as if we did something that required a lot of work. So let's close that, and I want to focus on this second project down here. We have one project called Lesson 01, that is our web application. So we could run this if we wanted to, and we could actually see that in use. But I want to focus on lesson01.tests, and there are already some tests created for us. If you go to the controllers folder, and then you can see that there are some tests for home controller. Now, there are several test frameworks that you could use for testing not only ASP.NET applications, but any .NET application. InUnit is one of those, and it's very popular. But one also comes built in with Visual Studio. It's called MS Test, and that's what we are going to be using throughout this course. One, because there's really no setup involved. It's just there. And that's really the only reason why we are going to use it. So if we wanted to run these tests, we could do so in a couple of different ways. We can right-click and we can choose Run Tests, or we can go to the Test menu item. We can choose to run all tests, run failed tests, run the tests that haven't been run yet, or we can run past tests. Now there is a test window, so if you go to Windows and then Test Explorer, it will either pop up over here on the right-hand side of the screen, or it will be on the left-hand side of the screen. It doesn't matter where it is as long as it pops up. And we have several options. We can run all of them, or we can run individual, like the failed test, the not run, the past, and so on and so forth. Or we can also just run an individual test by right-clicking on the test method, click on Run Tests, and that will run the test. As you can see, I right-clicked on Index and chose Run Test, and all it ran was the index test. Now, the green check mark means that the test passed, but we can make this so that it doesn't pass. All we have to do is change this assertion. Now, you'll see that we have three things here. We have arrange, act, and assert, and we will talk about that in a future lesson. So let's just change our assert. We are asserting that something is not null, which is our view result. But if we change this to is null, then the test is not going to pass. So if we run the test again, then we are going to see that this indeed does not pass. So you can right-click on that test in the Test Explorer and choose Run Selected Tests, and this is going to fail. Now we have a red X. And so this is the basis of MS Test. We have a test class, which is a class with the test class attribute. Then we specify our test methods with the test method attribute. So I'm going to close out of this Visual Studio Express, and I'm going to open up Visual Studio Professional. Now the reason why I'm going to use the professional version of Visual Studio is that the Express Edition does not support add-ons or extensions. And I'm going to use an add-on for this course. It's called InCrunch. It is an automated test runner as well as a code coverage tool. Now in the next lesson, I'm not going to use InCrunch, but I'm going to show you what we get with InCrunch. And of course, you don't have to have InCrunch installed in order to go through this course, but I want to show you what we are going to see throughout this course. So I've opened this up in Visual Studio Professional. I have to go to InCrunch and I have to enable InCrunch for this project. And there are several options. I'm just going to fly through these. And this is going to automatically run these tests. I don't have to do anything. You can see that over here, InCrunch is starting to compile the code and it's going to run them. And then it looks like that everything just went away. And that's because by default, InCrunch hides all of the passing tests. So we can see that there are some green dots here. These are the code coverage visual cues. Anything that's green says that this code is covered and it's also passing. So if we go to the controllers inside of the main project and go to Home Controller, we're going to see that all of these are covered by some test. Now the yellow means that this code is covered and it passed, but it took some time to execute. But this is InCrunch, and any change that we make is going to be automatically updated. So if I change this back to is null, then here in a few seconds, InCrunch is going to execute all of the tests once again, and we see that it failed. And being able to get instant feedback for any change that you make is very, very nice. Because as you are writing your code, if you see that a test fails, then you know that that test right then failed. And then you can address whatever it is that needs to be addressed. Well, in the next lesson, and really in the next couple of lessons, we aren't going to get into ASP.NET just yet. We need to go over some fundamentals of testing, and that's what we will be doing in the next couple of lessons.